Hello everyone, my name is Zina Abdulkadir. Today I will be going over my UML models and health informatics standards for Dr. Bhaskaran's Information 635 course from Mercer University. I will briefly be describing 3 UML models that I've created and also some health informatics standards and further details on why I chose these certain topics. Use case diagram. The use case diagram is the first diagram model that I chose. And then I will shortly narrate a message design process. When creating my use case, the first step I took was to identify all the human beings that will be used in the model. And then after I carefully read the scenario and background several times, I identified my 4 entities, which I found to be John, John's family, physician, receptionist, and then the general hospital, and lastly, the pulmonologist. After I compiled the human beings and placed them on the model, I found it to be a little bit more easier to connect the interactions among the different entities and using keywords such as mobile device, CPOE systems, email confirmation to identify the information that's being shared among both groups. I chose this model specifically because I found that the use case model is just a great tool for defining the communication process between the actor and health information. And when I read this scenario, I felt that this would be the best option to represent information data management. And I found that this is a great illustration and it's necessary when displaying health data information exchange process. A few challenges I faced with this one was finding the proper placement when it comes to connecting 2 entities and making sure that the data and the information that's shared between the entities is properly placed, and understanding the purpose in the use case model made it a bit easier going through the diagram process. Activity diagram. So when I did my activity diagram, I found that this is a multi-step process that includes the use of objects that communicate messages amongst each in a timely fashion. I found that this identification is put in 4 boxes within the model and will represent individuals that will be initiating the communication process. And that messages will be placed in between the boxes as the actors sent and received the message. I chose this model because I found that the interaction between these entities is basically put in a short period of time. So this displays the interaction between the 2 messages as they send and also as they receive. And I just found this to be an excellent example in the communication process between the patient and the healthcare provider within a given time. The challenges I faced with this diagram is that it was hard trying to decide what interactions I wanted to put emphasis on and the order I wanted to put the message system. I noticed that it required a lot of communication between the application course and understanding the interaction diagram within a healthcare system is kind of difficult and requires a little bit more research. So as I did my research, I found it to be a better option for me to go with. The third diagram I did was the interaction diagram. The interaction diagram is basically when doing this model, the first step I took was implementing the initial state note. Then I basically arranged a transition between the fork to separate the different activities within the process. And then I added additional transition join, which helped embody and complete the activity process towards the end. Both alignment was necessary, and the use of swim lanes helped incorporate and address multiple components, such as alternate responses. and I finalized it by composing the activity diagram together by implementing. I found that the activity diagram to be basically help make a smooth work environment and the process it takes to organize the series of the events that were occurring, and I found it to be a really great source in exemplifying the clinical process between the actor and the different health organizations. And then my biggest challenge I faced was basically going back and forth using my UML model to construct this model. I felt like they were necessary to be side by side when putting together this model, and the vocabulary and the structure, it just required multiple steps and components and actions to be completed, and I had a hard time placing the interaction when it comes to the transition fork and join and where to properly connect. So it was just more of a technicality aspect that goes along with it. So when it comes to HL7 versions, one of the topic discussions that was in our assignment was which one did we choose to make our message implementation model, basically. So the one I chose was the version 3. I noticed that when I was creating the implementation message transaction, that the version 3 was made available for us as students, and that after watching the lab demo that Dr. Bascaron provided, I found that the version 3 was a little bit more easier to use. Even though version 2 is more popular and is often seen within a healthcare setting, I felt that version 3 was a better option when it came to implementing the process of communication that I needed when completing this part of the assignment. So now I will quickly go over my second part of my assignment. Dr. Bascaron had us basically, he gave a list of different clinical classification systems and codes, and told us to basically pick 2 that we would like to go into further detail and just basically give examples on. The 2 that I chose was the SNM EDCT model, and I also chose the LOINC model. So when doing this part of the project, this required a little bit more research and using my class book as a resource. So basically, what I found with the SNOMEDCT is basically that is identified as the systemized nomenclature of medicine clinical terminology. Basically is used when electronic healthcare data it helps assist in collecting and recovering clinical information records. I found that this was a multilingual clinical terminology that's used and helps with interoperability and the different components and concepts such as codes, using terms, and studying the relationship using a hierarchy method. I just thought this was just a great tool to use when recording information about the patient and trying to later on retrieve or reuse the clinical information at that certain care point of time and managing it as it goes. The second one I decided to do was the LOINC model, and basically with this model, it's also known as the logical observation identifier names and codes, and this basically simplifies and translates the different codes among different healthcare systems. It was basically developed to address specific characteristics and traits that's seen among the patient population. It can distinguish between tests and other observations within different clinical settings, and these codes are used more for description and names rather than the observation discovery. I found that this was just a great tool to use when it comes to looking at clinical sections that cover observations and can be made within unique schemas and avoiding the generalization process. That's my reference. Thank you so much.